Hey everyone, this is my Counter-Strike map, Victorian, set in the crossroads of the 1830s Industrial Revolution. If you can't already tell from the footage, Victorian is vastly different from what you might expect a Counter-Strike map to be. Right away you can see it's more open, less segmented, and there's more verticality, but most importantly, still built from the ground up for competitive play. At least that's my goal when I was first designing the map. Victorian is my attempt at challenging the Counter-Strike community to rethink what a Defuse map could be. It's also a challenge for myself to see how well my hypothesis would hold up over the course of continued playtesting. While these are my goals, it's not the hill I plan to die on. I'm far from perfect, and I know changes will have to be made as I learn more about the relationship between the mechanics and level design. If you're a fan of my design documentary series, the making of DE Victorian is in the works, but will take some time. With this video, I wanted to provide an introduction to the space to help soften the learning curve and allow players to experience Victorian with as little frustration as possible, as well as to show a glimpse of the depth I believe this map has to offer, should players be willing to suffer through the initial learning curve. Both teams are presented with two main paths that branch out into more options along the way. I'll start by breaking down the main paths for each team, where they meet up, and the first encounters that can take place. Starting first with the counter-terrorists. Counter-terrorists spawn on the docks. Going left up the staircase will take you to the bridge, hosting the upper A bomb site. The soonest possible engagement can happen just as you peek over the bridge horizon, looking through the double doors. Or, if you choose to strafe along the fence, you can gain some vertical leverage looking down into the warehouse. In return, you will be more vulnerable. If you wanted to take this even further, you could follow up onto the bridge wall, increasing both your risk and your potential reward. Once you reach the bridge, you can choose to play defensively by using the bridge slope as cover, or close the gap and set up behind the door. Just to the right of the double doors is a dead-end hallway that can be used to peek into the back end of the warehouse. Be aware that this can be used both ways. And just to the right of the dead-end hallway, you can access B site by climbing over the nearby wall. From here, you can set up a defensive stance around bomb site B, or forsake your defensive position to try and infiltrate behind enemy lines via the dual ladders. From here, you can flank behind either one of the main routes the Ts would have taken at the beginning of the round. This way, success via elimination might very well be a viable strategy. You don't just have to play defensively as a CT. If you take a right just before the bridge into the construction building, you can now support your teammates coming up from the docks. This position is also important for contesting enemy targets that may have accessed the rooftops. The A bomb site can also be armed from under the bridge. To manage this, you will have to commit to a one-way drop off the right side of the bridge. The terrorists have their own isolated route that takes them behind the bridge into the lower A site. The first encounter should happen just here as you round the corner. One way counter-terrorists can check this route from on top of the bridge are the two windows pushed right up next to the warehouse double doors, but keep in mind this position is vulnerable to terrorist Molotovs. Going right off of spawn, you will have the choice to go in for a close range encounter just in front of bomb site B, or post up behind these stacks of lumber for medium range engagements, to try and catch terrorists as they exit the choke point. If you choose to go for the close range engagement, this sign will cover your behind, so you can just focus on working the corner. If you choose to take up a position on the lumber barge, it's your job to also cover the terrorists' alternative exits through the apartment building windows. Remember, throwing an incendiary at the beginning of the round at the ramp choke point will buy you and your team a lot of time, forcing the Ts to take the longer routes through the apartment building. Now, for the terrorist side. Spawning in the alleyways between the warehouse and the city, this works much the same way as the CT side. There are two major options that branch off into smaller options along the way. Taking a left off spawn and going up the ramp will take you to a position overlooking the docks. You can remain here and contest CTs that have taken up positions on the lumber barge. Or you can choose to close the gap and go in for a closer range engagement by following the ramp down to the bomb site B junction. Winning this engagement at the junction will allow you to contest enemy targets on the bridge. Or, if you hug the wall close enough, you should be able to bypass the bridge and sneak straight into lower bomb site B. Just keep an eye out for any CTs in the construction building. You may need to Molotov this position to secure any further advances. Alternatively, if you are having a difficult time contesting enemy targets positioned in the construction building, provided you have a teammate covering the docks, you can make your way along the wall using the steel beam as cover as you close the gap and gain a better position to contest those targets. From here, you will also be able to contest CTs on the bridge and have some generous rotation options via the steel beam. Just before the first ramp, terrorists can also take a left and make their way through the apartment building, all the way up to the rooftops. This requires more travel time, and you will have to break a window which acts as an audio cue for the enemy team below. While very powerful in some engagements, the rooftops are very weak in others, like the previously mentioned construction building for example. From here, you can rush to arm the B site on the very top of the scaffolding. If successful, you can make the retakes very difficult for CTs. It is important to note that both of the previous options can be locked down by CTs right at the start with a well-placed incendiary and some good positioning. If this becomes the case, you might want to consider preemptively jumping out of the side window of the apartment building. This requires much more travel time to get back into a good position versus going for the first choke point, but this option will become increasingly more valuable as the rounds progress and CTs have built up a nice stockpile of deployment. Finally, keep in mind that jumping down into the water and coming up onto the docks is also a viable option. This way, you have the opportunity to pinch CTs who have been pushed back from the bridge. Making a right off spawn will take you into the warehouse. The soonest possible encounter can happen 10 seconds in, but there's still plenty of breathing room to close the gap and set up next to the double doors. While one smoke will be enough to cut off the line of sight between the bridge and the lower warehouse floor, you can bypass this by making your way up the steel racks. This way, both teams have multiple angles through the double doors to help break the tension. Terrorists who maintain solid control over the double doors, but are still having a hard time pushing out, can climb up to the catwalk and gain vertical leverage over the bridge. It's a risky move, as you'll be exposed to CTs on your way up, but when earned, the catwalk can be a valuable asset for your team, even more so when you consider the additional route onto the warehouse rooftop. Accessing the warehouse rooftop is risky due to all the exposure, but it allows you to contest other areas of the map and rotate into B bomb site by dropping down. Taking a right at the double doors will lead you down into the train station. Depending on how you want to play this, a lot can happen here. You can peek through the bridge windows to help your team break the choke point on top of the bridge, or make your way down to contest the lower portion of bomb site A under the bridge. As I mentioned before, many of these cross-map engagements feed into one another. If the CTs won the fight in front of bomb site B, they can also put pressure on terrorists attempting to arm under the bridge. A single well-placed smoke will help you advance on the site if your team lost the junction engagement. Having a teammate with you while you arm the lower A site can sometimes be essential if enemy targets have the top of A site locked down. As soon as they hear you arming below, they may try to drop down and stop you.
That about covers all the initial engagements for both teams. Just like other Defuse maps, winning this first phase of the round sets the pace for the rest of the match. Only this effect is amplified in Victorian. One more pattern you must have noticed by now is how much freedom is available to the players. Players on both teams get to choose their engagement ranges rather consistently, regardless of which path you take. This makes all the different weapon classes viable, despite how open the map may look from a distance. If you know how to navigate the map, you can isolate your encounters effectively enough to play a dedicated close range or medium to long range class.
Don't be fooled into thinking this map, with all of its open lines of sight, is an opera's wet dream. One benefit of having more open lines of sight is the fact that trying to hardscope particular angles will constrict valuable peripheral vision, leaving you much more vulnerable to being flanked. And keep in mind that many of these first encounters we went over aren't completely isolated from one another. Unlike traditional Defuse maps, winning engagements in Victorian will usually earn you additional opportunities somewhere else in the map. For example, winning the engagement on the lumber barge as a CT will now allow you to hone in on this line of sight just in front of the warehouse double doors, which can help prevent terrorists from taking upper bridge. Also, securing the B-site junction will now allow you to move towards the bottom portion of the bridge, allowing your team on the top to focus on their job holding the line while you contest enemy targets progressing towards lower A. For the terrorists, winning the fight in front of bomb site B means you will be able to flank enemy targets on the bridge. Where players may lack in rotation time between the two main paths, they make up for by being able to support each other from across the map. One final feature that is crucial to point out are some of the more neutral options. These are powerful positions or paths that can be accessed after locking down certain portions of the map. The first and most notable being the crane just outside of bomb site B junction. Progressing up the spiraling path will leave you vulnerable at certain points and empowered in others. It all depends on your team's control of the map. At the very top of the crane, you will be able to see both bomb sites at once. And because of your elevation, you can see the lower and upper army portions of each site. Furthermore, you can rotate to either of these sites by way of the steel beam. So obviously, a very powerful asset for your team to have, but also difficult to earn and even more difficult to maintain due to the exposure. The building under construction can also be a valuable asset when approaching from the main street. The ramps can be used as cover to contest or protect both upper and lower bomb site A, and if progressed even further up, you'll have a more dominant position overlooking the top of the bridge and the double doors. At the apex of the ramps, you'll be able to see into terrorist spawn. The only time you would need to use this is if an enemy target is posted up on the opposite side, covering the choke point from the bridge into bomb site B.
With all that said, just try to have fun. I know it can be difficult playing maps that break all the traditions you might have come to know and love, but my hope is that people will learn to accept that my goals with Victorian was not to just make another traditional Counter-Strike layout, and to object in the way that essentially boils down to it's not what I'm used to, is just simply missing the point. And if nothing else, I just hope that Victorian could inspire others in the community to take their designs further. I'm sure we could at least agree that wouldn't be such a bad thing.